opening the rooms now. So half of you will be with Jody and the other half is with me. Good. All right. We have about 10 minutes just to share any insights that you had around basically, yeah, what did you, or how have you applied the learnings from last week around facilitation? Anybody who wants to go, how did you apply it? Were you able to run any conversations? And it could also be outside of a work context. That is equally fine. Any type of reflections that you have. Maybe you want to think about that first, which is absolutely fine. Liam, did you raise your hand? I didn't notice. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say that over the past week, I've been facilitating also with the Institute for the Future for their 10-year summit. And so they're pulling together people from all around the world, very different perspectives on various issues across, like system spanning from social to tech, politics, and being able to sort of hold space in a room and listen and feel it out to be able to understand the variety of perspectives before proceeding forward, and making sure everyone gets heard. Appreciated what was discussed in our sessions around that.
Did you see any difference in the way how you approached it?
Definitely. I feel that having these sessions, it's almost like having a muscle that's flexed. It's like I feel like warmed up already as a result of these sessions. So I could just drop into those sessions and I don't know, I just felt more on point.
Thanks, Ian. That's great. Thank you. Jenny, I think you also wanted to go, if I'm not mistaken.
I felt, so a colleague of mine is basically stepping out of our team. So it's just me and my partner, and there's like a big gap in between. So I don't know, since you've been saying facilitation, we always facilitate, and that we just bring in ourselves as we are, it just gave me more confidence, and I do question him all the time and support him in the sponsor process, and yeah, try to just step up and be a solution designer as far as I can with all the knowledge I have. And even though it might be a stupid question or not, but I feel like these questions are usually not really stupid because they're so obvious, but nobody is talking about it, or just assuming everybody knows the answer or is going from the same point. So yeah.
Thank you, Jenny, for sharing that. What I heard you say is that you feel more confident now and that you ask questions more than what you used to. And I would also say, I don't think there are any stupid questions. It's really just important to acknowledge that we all come from a specific context as we enter into a conversation or even a facilitation situation. And I think if you feel that the question is relevant, I would always ask it, because that's what you need to know. And I don't think there's any stupid questions. I would also always acknowledge this to make sure that participants know that. I think that's also relevant. Anything else that someone wants to share as we are debriefing our learnings from last week? What else did you experience around it? Yes, Ellen, please.
There were a couple of things, but the thing that really stuck with me, I didn't even realize it until you asked the question, but that when our facilitation superpowers, and one of the things that came up for me that I wasn't expecting was a willingness to be uncomfortable, because I do a lot of facilitation around just really in communities where there's really histories of like deep racial inequity, and I come into it as a white person. And also just with some of the client work, I tend to, in the last couple of years, I've been facilitating a lot with other facilitators who I don't know very well. And so trying to work on like those like co-design issues. And so both in my professional life of like trying to figure that stuff out. Oh, there was another one about don't be married to your design. I completely threw out the design of something I'm facilitating next week because it's not serving the client. You know, we started from scratch, and there's some discomfort around that. And then I was telling our small group, I sat in a hospital room with my sister-in-law all day yesterday, who's very, very ill. And I was thinking about that, like just willing to show up and be uncomfortable. Like if you don't fight that feeling, it's okay. You can just be present and say, yep, this is what I'm going to do for the next 8 hours. So it was like facilitation / life skill.
Thank you, Ellen, for sharing that so openly. Totally. I mean, it's absolutely fine to feel uncomfortable. And also sometimes it's also good to acknowledge this and share that with the person you're with, or even just with the people that you're in the room with, or the group you're working with. You know, sometimes I do the same. I feel I have this rumbling in my belly. What is it? Is anybody else feeling the same thing? And then it's also, you don't make it, it's not your own anymore. You also share it with the group, and everybody else can carry it with you, which also is comforting sometimes. Something else that anybody wants to share as a reflection about what you've learned around facilitation from
I'd
last
like to
week?
share something that I was
Nicole,
not
please.
able to make last week, but I've just in the last couple of weeks been a part of a bigger design group, and want to share that I'm currently living the experience of not validating and not surfacing like hidden agendas from a sponsor group and barreling into a design. And I'm here to tell you it's horrible to be in that place. So I was just reflecting with the group when on our first breakout around, you know, how to surface those things before doing design. And so I'm guessing that probably everybody has one of these painful learning experiences. But I'm in it right now, like in the middle of it, and suffering the lack of sleep and all of that. So there's a lot of, you know, coming to this and then experiencing the maybe not so elegantly unfolded principles that we're learning here. So ouch.
No, it's thank you for sharing this. And I also appreciate that this, I think, also acknowledges that this is a safe space where we can share these things. This is not uncommon, you know. I think all of us, we have these sleepless nights because either we feel uncomfortable or even not well prepared enough, or we don't know what's going to happen. And for some reason, I feel it always turns out to be okay. Because if we just trust the process and also trust what we know and trust our sensation into it, I think it's fine. But I also know these troubles with working with a sponsor team, it's better they come out early than while you are in the process. And I think you can also, you know, address them right in the moment when it needs to be addressed, other than you halfway through the session and then you try to sort of bring it all back together. So it's good that it sort of comes up before you run into a session or anything else, because that's also the energy that will sort of come up again in the session, but it's good to address it early on. Thank you. Anything else that you feel called to share?
I think maybe related to that, I've kind of, yeah, the thing about not being married to the program, we've been like reiterating and reiterating and reiterating the same day of the same week for like weeks on end now. And I think that idea of, yeah, as you say, Svenja, believing that when we're there on the day, everything will be fine and are great. And it's so important that one doesn't try and stick to the original plan if it's not working. That's something I feel like I've been applying. Yeah, just being calm about it and just letting it flow, letting it go and seeing where it lands.
And the good thing is, if you've done like 15 iterations of your session design beforehand, it actually sets you up for success, because you almost played through all the different options that are possible. And because if you are really structured to your one and only design, the first draft we've ever done, of course it will fall apart, because you're not really ready to give up, and you're not also willing to sense into what else is emerging, because often we design for emergence, and it's only possible if you really play through different options of what's doable around us.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of time. We have like a minute left or so, but I also want to make sure if there's anything else that someone wants to share.
I have a really quick one that's coming up for me this week, is that I'm really noticing the difference of my work when this approach is not part of it, my current work, and what we're talking about. Like it's just becoming it's becoming clearer and more, I'm feeling a tension. I've been feeling the tension for a year now, but now it's getting uncomfortable. That I need to
And-
shift. I need to shift my work.
Yeah, I guess there's probably lots of learning that's sinking in, and obviously we'll also share a bit more today, but it's also about integration. And I'm sure, I think as Adrian said the other day, make sure you have some time after we finished here to really process a lot more and not dive right into the doing stuff. Yeah. Thank you for this. I'm gonna bring the others back, so maybe I'll give them a countdown clock of 60 seconds now. And let's see, maybe they take the entire 60 seconds, which gives us a little bit more time. Did anybody speak to another Value App member? Did these conversations happen already? Any insights from there?
Yeah, I chatted with Dan Newman and it was really good. And he gave me some really clear direction on building a business and really differentiating between linear systems that don't need emergent design and complex systems that do, and how we're really serving the latter, among other things. So it was really excellent and I appreciate it. I appreciate the connection.
Nice. He'll be with us later today as well. So we'll all get more of him today. That's super. Anyone else who spoke with someone? And if you haven't, I think Thea will help you to set this up and introduce you. So it's not too late, even if this is our last day today, it's because you can still have these conversations. All right, wonderful. Everyone's coming back. That's nice. Welcome back to the space.
Could I just quickly, Kathleen was talking about working with sponsors and sharing models. And Kathleen, I just want to let you know that very seldom, not seldom, we certainly share Scan Focus Act, but a lot of the models are mostly things that we keep in our pocket. It's more behind the curtain. And so you want to really think about, you don't necessarily want to share a model unless it's going to bring the conversation forward. Anyway, we will get to that a little bit more.
Respond to that for just a second. I know that, so one reason why I didn't share it, but this is also a group that have been out doing their work as activists. And so I've been preparing them for understanding there are models that can help them as a consulting team to better facilitate the work they want to do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Svenja.
I also want to just acknowledge the conversation we had in our group, that it feels like a lot of us are now stepping up into feeling uncomfortable, and it's okay. And there seems to be some type of a shift happening as we apply what we're learning. And that's okay to be in the uncomfortable space. And we also talked about that it is important to iterate your design and not to necessarily be married to it or fall in love with your own design, to keep that space for emergence. Yeah, and that we all seem to have warmed up our muscles. So I just want to presence that conversation here too. Great. All right. Today is week 4. And if we look back at our Recode Cube, we get to the last part of it. But again, everything is connected. So obviously today we talk about sharing, even though I don't necessarily like the word sharing and as part of this cube. Maybe it should actually mean be integration or something, because I feel that's what we probably rather want to do today. But everything around this part is really sharing what we've done with the participants as they've been through a process, but it's also the sharing of the activities while they're in it. It also replies to, what is it that we do at the afterlife of a session or an adventure or an event? What is it that we need to create? How do we keep up a momentum alive? I think that's a really important one. I've just returned from a session, an in-person session in Switzerland, where we started to create a community around a vision for 2040. And obviously there's a whole momentum now created. So it's really, really important to figure out, what do we do with it? So we need to respond fast. We need to actually share the outcomes with them and also hold the space for other conversations to happen. So that's a lot we're going to talk about today, and also we'll shift into models. And I think Jody, yes, thank you. We'll talk about 2 models today, and they've also been part of your pre-reading, but we'll dive deeper into them, and you can use those models, and you'll see in a moment, almost as a diagnostic tool or as a design tool or as a listening tool as well. So I think we'll dive right into the first one, which is the Vantage Point model. Jody, what do you want to share about that? You are on mute, my dear.
Have you all had a chance to take a look at that model? Can I see a show of hands? If you, this to me, this is probably the model that I use most all the time. It's a model that can be used for designing, for facilitating, for diagnosing problems, as a module with the participants, and for listening. It's extremely useful. And so if we think about the Vantage Point model, and we think about the way that we are communicating, and I think especially the focus today where people go pretty deeply into task, it's really very helpful to understand, first of all, where people are at, and second of all, depending on where you're at in Scan, Focus, and Act, you want to pull them back, and you want to be able to have some granularity in the approach. So I am just sharing, first of all, how I've used it as an assignment and as a very task-oriented piece with a group. So I've given them the model, I've described the model, and then I've broken it. This was a very large group of hundreds. So I actually gave them each of the 7 vantage points and asked about how they could see doing their work from this perspective. So I'm just going to show you then as well the logistics assignment, just to give you an idea. So first, how would you do it as task, and then as logistics? What are the mechanisms that could be used? Who does it? Tactics. What is the process of aligning the tasks and the logistics with the strategy? Who is it best done from? And I think if you also, some of the things I've done is I've clustered them. So I've done task, logistic, tactics as a 3. And how do they interact and how do we sequence them? Same with strategy, policy, and culture, philosophy. So you can either do them individually or you can do them as a cluster. Again, strategy. So what do we need as an organization, our objectives and intent to meet this goal? How do we align in strategy? And policy. What are the rules that we need to put in place? What are the rules that will ensure collaboration and things, and what's out of bounds and what's in play? Culture. You know, culture eats strategy for breakfast. We've all heard that. And so I do spend a lot of time on culture, and it's really useful to give the sponsor or the main sponsor this particular vantage point, because that is really in what I feel like the leaders are responsible. So what are the ways to ensure the group can have this collective input? What is the culture that we want on this project? And finally, philosophy. So again, this is then pulling way back. So at a very task level, this is one of the ways that we use it. And I just will share this. This is one of Svenja's, and it's small, so we'll give it to you. But this is one of Svenja's assignments, where she gave all of the vantage point model as a definition, and then had the team map it out in terms of what fits where. And so this is one of, Sven, do you want to say something more about that?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So this was an exercise where we actually were working with a group that was about to build a new foundation. And we explained the model in plenary first, and then we sent them into parallel groups, and each group received the same assignment. And they all were supposed to actually think about key elements that make up the organization and write one element on a post-it note. And then the idea was just to see, where would that actually fit on the Vantage Point model? And if you want to go on to the next slide, Jody, we then actually drew up this large Vantage Point model in the plenary space and had them all put out their ideas in the Vantage Point where it actually belonged to. And for them, it was almost a revelation to understand, oh, really? Okay, I always thought, with this point, I was talking very concretely, but I would never have thought that there are so many different vantage points that I could actually explore and think of. And it also really surfaced that the organization was not necessarily speaking the same language to start with, because someone put down a point that we all sort of put down on the strategy level, but someone else might have thought, oh, really? I thought this was always like on a policy level. These are our guidelines, but in fact, it's really the strategy aspect. So this exercise helped a lot for them to really level out what's relevant. And I think it's important to share this model also as an integration tool, as now today it's really all about integration, and you can use this actually as you work with the group, but it's also a really interesting way to create a shared language as you start with working with a group and even with the sponsor team as well.
So you can imagine at this point that you might have to have an emergent moment when you have these different post-its in each of these categories of the vantage points. You might have thought that would be an endpoint, but as you see what's on there, you're like, oh my gosh, I need the groups to assemble this into what this means to them. So in this point, you might change your design and then actually give each group one of the vantage points in all those post-its and say, come up with the question that this is asking, or what is the conclusion here? And so some of this you could do a very quick round and get deeper and have, again, the point is to get the participants to help you and help themselves find their way to the next place that they need to be. So we can use it both as a design tool through Scan, Focus, and Act and where you want them to be, as a diagnostic tool, as Svenja and I had done, as a report out, as a sense-making piece, as an integration piece. And then I just want to introduce the way that I have been using it. I have noticed, and I wonder if you have too, that people don't really have any idea how to listen to one another. And if you're in a complicated session and folks think that listening is waiting to speak, you have a problem. And so I often do the levels of listening, which is from Kelvie Bird and Theory U and a whole bunch of other people with a group. And then I say, while you're listening to somebody, try to figure out where they're at. Because if you're talking at philosophy and they're talking at tasks, you're not really having the same conversation. Once you have a shared language around vantage points, you can say to someone, wait a minute, are you talking philosophy or are you talking logistics? Because I'm down in the weeds. And it's a very quick way to align a group, yourself, and other people. And it's also a chance, if you're in the front of the room, to call out to people, to call out to the group. We are already way down in this task level, and it's a bit early for us to be jumping to solutions. You can pull out this model. And again, it's an emergent moment where you can say, if we were to focus more on the strategy or the philosophy and culture at this point, what would that mean as a framing? The other thing about using it as a facilitation tool, and if you've read Dan's book, who's joining us today from the front of the room, he often will say that as he's listening from the front of room, somebody's question or somebody's comment, and they're say at policy, he'll either go with his answer up a vantage point to culture or philosophy, or down to the weeds. There's something about helping people realize where they're at in terms of vantage point as a facilitated tool that is also super useful. So I'm just going to stop there and see if anyone has, that was a quick run through a lot of uses of the vantage point model.
There's a question from Monique as well, just, what are the functions of this model? And maybe it's just worth just to zoom out a little bit more. In fact, what is this model all about? So it's drawn up as a topography map, if you like. And you could either see it as a mountain or as a valley. And there's 7 layers to it. And sort of the outer layer is the philosophy. It's almost like your fundamental beliefs, or sometimes they're actually hidden. The next layer is the culture piece, where it's about the values and norms and the behaviors that almost define the components of the system. Then the next layer in is the policy, which is really about, the boundaries of how you want to be with one another. Then the next layer in is the strategy. It's really about the organization or the disposition and the direction of the large scale forces that sort of drive the organization or the group. And then you go deeper into the weeds, as Jody said. So the next layer is tactics, where it's the art of matching resources somehow to the next layer, which is the logistics in terms of, what are the mechanics of how do we distribute things? How do we get stuff done? And then this is the last layer, which is the tasks. It's really the work that needs to get done. And you can also combine them with one another. So you could actually take the first 3, philosophy, culture, policy, because they together, in fact, steer the evolution of the system you're working with. It's like the larger picture of things. Then you can group also policy with strategy and tactics, which is about they steer kind of the operations and the structure of your system. And then the last 3 layers are the tactics, logistics, and tasks, and they steer the work that needs to get done. And in order to really understand an organization, you need to look at everything. You need to be clear about what are the tasks, and maybe sometimes they're at the peak. If you looked at this as a mountain, then this is at the peak. In order to understand also the philosophy of an organization, you need to really look at some of the tasks that they do. Or if the philosophy is the key point, then actually the tasks somehow become the valley. So that's sort of the structure of the model.
I'm thinking it's also a coherence building kind of tool. So it allows, a group to orient to see the connectedness between points of action as well. So, I've had instances where when you're working with a leadership group who are trying to decide whether or not a particular set of features ought to be included in a particular rollout or something like that, you can draw them to their attention to the fact that are these features or is our implementation aligned to the culture that we want to be creating? Is it aligned to the philosophy that we've tried to put into place? And it gives people another way of appraising kind of their action along that topography.
There's a few questions. So I tend to use the vantage points, especially the philosophy and culture in SCAN very heavily, because you really want to not get into the weeds. So I think that Monique was like, how do you use it? For focus, I tend to then head to the middle area. And for ACT, I use all of them. So, and again, you can play with it to use it. The assignment that I did, I think I gave people about 35 minutes to come up with those quick approaches to each of the levels. Svenja's was 45 minutes. And Nicole also has, how do you introduce this to the group? Well, often I'll just draw it on the board and I will say, and have folks say, where are we at right now? You can ask the group, are we talking about philosophy or do we need to talk about the culture of this first? Is it important that we're at task and tactics level? So you can use it as a diagnostic level with the group right then and there and have them talk about where they're at and where they need to be. And you can listen into that and understand it. Anything else? Yeah, you don't have to go into the deep mechanics of it. I think like you could do a very quick, as Nicole said, how easily is it introduced? It's a pretty intuitive model. And so you can do a very quick drawing of it and talk to folks. Are we at the philosophy level? What happens if we're not paying attention to our culture? So you can actually introduce it as you speak to the group.
Jody, do you introduce it as like, you know, here's you need to be aware of all different levels of this in your organization? Like, is it that kind of a thing? Or do you pull it out as a tool when a group is lost? Like I've been with groups where they're, as you said, they're diving into tactics, but there's these huge other issues that they haven't dealt with around culture and politics. So I can see pulling it out for that. But yeah, I guess I'm still not completely clear about like what kinds of situations you would use it in.
I mean, often what I would say is that it's in my pocket. And I am thinking, this group is at the wrong level. And there's a misfiring, as Jason said, or a misalignment between the strategy and some of the other levels. So I think, but when I use it with a group, which is often, it's because I think that we're lost, maybe, or we're at the wrong level, or I want to help orient them to the granularity of the task ahead, and that to kind of stretch them out from task or tactics. Svenja, anybody else?
We want to do actually a quick exercise that maybe sort of symbolizes what we are talking about. Of course, there's a lot of theory that we're throwing at you. And so we'll just want to do a couple of things there. But there's one more question from Stephanie. I want to make sure we get to you too. Go ahead.
It's not really a question. It's something that came in my mind. In last December, I did a leadership course with the London Business School, and they were using a somewhat similar model. They call it the congruence model. When they start to analyze how a team or how a company is doing, to start with a strategy first, then analyze that strategy on 4 different lenses: the culture of the company or the team, the tasks, the people, the human resources, and then the policies, system, and processes. And through that analysis, they came up with the results. And I found it was a very interesting model that that maybe some people have seen as well.
Thank you. Monique, you also have your hand up, please.
Yeah, maybe in relation to like where is it applicable? Can you also apply it to like a broader system of multiple organizations, or is it mainly focused on one organization with a specific aim? Or
I mean, I'd love to hear from Louise on that, because we have, like with the Global Maritime Forum, a bunch of organizations that need to be aligned and that may not be at the same level. And Louise, do you want to say something about how you've used it or thought about it with aligning several people?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in the annual summits that we have, I'm not sure how, Svenja, you have used it with Hilde, but at least the way, if I could, looking at it now and trying to have a critical eye to it, the people basically that we gather for these big events are basically the CEOs and the top of the top. So they tend to only focus on the very so the broad spheres, or I don't know how you call them, just the biggest vantage points. So the philosophy, the culture, and the policy, and maybe a bit of the strategy, but they really have almost maybe no idea about how does it work at the task, logistics, and tactics level. So I think, and that's what we see also. It's how then do you, with what they come up with at a session, how do you make sure that then they transfer these new ideas throughout the different spheres of the model? And I think we've used, I mean, going through the model, it also made me think of the 3CAT model that we've used quite a lot as well, Svenja, and with you and Hilde. And I think it relates a lot to that model, but in a simpler way, in a way. And I think that it sticked a lot with, I know, some of the participants, and certainly with the team as well, to help make sure that we understand each other. And we also use it to bring it back to some sessions to say, hold on, you're definitely at the conceptual level, so probably more at the policy, culture, philosophy. Let's go down to the mechanical level.
Sounds good. I now like to have 4 volunteers that want to be in a conversation with me. If you want to just raise your hand, that would be super. If I can just get 4 volunteers, Stephanie, Cian, nothing dangerous, really safe. Sarah and Ellen, super. If everybody else, if you can turn off your cameras, please. And then hover over someone's photo and click the 3 dots and click on hide non-video participants. So if you want to do this in a short moment. Does that work? Hold on. So click on someone who has their camera off and then hide non-video participants. So does everybody just only see the 5 of us? Okay, you shake your hands. Now, Stephanie, click on someone who has their camera off. Click on the 3 dots there and go on hide non-video participants. Cool. Does it work for Zian and everybody else as well? Aaron, Sarah? Okay, cool. So I want to be in a conversation with you and everybody else is listening in, but it's just us. So as a side note, this is also a great way just to really have a focused conversation, but you're still with other participants in the room, but it almost feels as if it's just us right now. We are just in a breakout. So that creates a different energy and atmosphere. I want everybody else who's listening in to observe how we are navigating the Vantage Point model. And if you don't have all the layers with you, that's okay too. You could almost think, you know, the philosophy piece, then we go to strategy and then all the task stuff. So just keep an eye on this as we are having a conversation. And the others who are with me will just be part of the conversation and we just go with the flow. All right, we'll do this for just a couple of minutes. And I just want everybody else just to listen in so that we can also show you how how you can use the Vantage Point model also in this type of context. So the conversation I'd like to have is around a key question, which is why do we think is planet-centered design essential? Why do you think planet-centered design is essential? And just jump right in. Why is that essential? Or maybe what in fact is planet-centered design to start with? I don't know. You tell me. Any ideas?
I think that one of the problems the large problems we're facing in the environmental crisis is a result of not having planet-centered design. So it's essential to have it to remediate and heal the planet's problems.
To heal the problems. Can you say a bit more what they concretely look like?
The problems of the planet?
Yeah, the ones that we need to heal. Mm-hmm.
The climate crisis,
mm-hmm.
and the heating of the planet and the pollution and not having systems to protect and reverse the effects of the impacts, the negative impacts.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What do the others think? Is there like alignment around that question that really there's like all the really urgent problems we need to face and we don't really have planet-centered design in place right now?
Unfortunately, we not only don't have planet-centered design in place at a lot of major policy institutions, but a lot of people are still divided over whether planet-centered design even matters. And you still have so many pockets of climate change deniers, people who would still, not follow a lot of moral and ethical directions about how they interact with the planet. So,
do you have any example of what these people do?
It can depend from a very action-oriented outcome like dumping toxic waste or leaching. But on the other end of the spectrum, it could extend to apathy and just not doing anything when you're seeing things go wrong around you.
I think there is also, if I may add to what Sarah and Zian was saying, is the complexity to apply planet-centered design has not fallen into pieces yet if you don't understand how every single system is connected. Everything is connected. Whatever you do in your single action has a repercussion of everything else. And there's still that, I mean, I see still very egocentric behavior, and people just don't want to care about a simple thing like putting a PET bottle into the right bin. It starts with your own actions, but it's trying to explain to people that your action actually influences others and other systems and other policies and et cetera, et cetera. If you don't grasp the overall complexity of the system, it's difficult for people to understand how fundamental, just trying to find the right word, fundamental it is, because we're dying out our planet.
Absolutely, Stephanie. It's interesting because there are a lot of organizations who, even when they're talking about their own internal strategy, aren't aware of the external forces that act upon them. So social, tech, policy, economic, and similarly, they aren't aware of the impact that they're having on those levers through their actions, because no one exists in a vacuum.
Yeah, what I have experienced, and maybe I can bring just a, Svenja, if you allow me, just something on the in my work, in my job, in the institution I'm working with, is when you start to talk to people about climate change, and Zian, you were talking about the climate denials. If you put around the table policy and scientists, just the time it takes for people to speak the same language about what they're speaking about. It starts by there. And then when you make clear that they speak the same language of what the message is, you can have kind of somehow a hope that they can actually work together to solve the issues.
So what do we think there? What I heard you say is that, you know, there's a disconnect between what we do and what's happening on the higher context. So can we dive deeper into this a little bit? Ellen, you wanted to come into, yes.
Yeah, I was thinking about the disconnect on the higher context of how we measure success. I mean, we're still measuring success based on an economic system that's all about consumption, and it doesn't work. It's like measuring success based on blowing the planes off of a door. You know, you can't keep flying the plane if that's what your measure of success is. So there's like some modeling and cultural and super structural issues around how people survive in this world where, you know, so many people aren't surviving and so many people can't survive in a system where there isn't all this consumption because the economics and the jobs and all that stuff are based on it. So there's like some really deep change, and sort of going back to what I said before, like, I think we need to be willing to be uncomfortable because they're not easy changes. But no. The consequence, the other option is not an option, you know.
I'm very curious. Thank you, Ellen. As we are all part of organizations or maybe working with organizations that have a stake in the planet, I wonder, what is it that we can do as this group of 5 right now? What is it that we can do and almost commit to on a day-to-day basis? Any ideas, thoughts?
I think, first of all, commitment to constantly being willing to learn and challenge our own assumptions and biases.
Yeah. Thank you, Zian. Sarah, you wanted to come in as well.
I'm going to ask a clarifying question about what you were wanting us to do to remediate the planets. What could you restate your question?
I just asked, what is it that we can actually concretely do to make sure that we are planet-centered? Anything that we can concretely do as this group of 5?
Maybe try to start to map. I mean, it will be impossible to map all the issues, but you can have a starting point of trying to map something. I have an example. I went 2 years ago to Papua, Indonesia, in a very, very remote area. And when I was taking the boat to go on the island, there was low tide, and all I can see was just flooded by plastic, because people have no income. So what they eat kind of pack of noodles the whole day because that's no less expensive. It's like 10 cents. So starting to understand, okay, just like as one single point, what influences the others, that maybe that's a way to start.
Thanks, Stephanie. Ellen, Sarah, do you have any ideas?
I think about like both planet and equity as a lens I bring in whenever I facilitate. You know, people are kind of in the weeds thinking about the thing of their organization, but I'm always bringing in the like, well, who's not in the room in terms of equity and access to empowerment and all those kinds of things. But then also, what's the greater impact on this plane that we're flying together? So that's just, those lenses are always with me, and something I'm sort of always trying to turn the camera on to make sure that they're thinking about that.
Thanks, Ellen. Sarah, anything you want to share?
Yeah, personally, I mean, I can commit to really taking this as a design feature of my life and applying it to all of my actions. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm in the middle of redesigning the services in my business. How can I serve the planet through these principles? And then also, as Stephanie was saying, just every sort of life choice you make, this becomes part of my decision making, so that I'm trying to embody it in my life as best I can.
Thank you. And if I just put my facilitator hat to the side and be a participant like you, I do the same. I really want to commit to being super intentional about my choices in a day-to-day behavior, and also be conscious of what role model do I want to be for my son, so that I live the values that I talk to as well. Thank you. I'll wrap this up now. We're not alone, there's others with us. You can all turn your cameras back on if you're still with us and haven't dropped out. Cool, thank you for coming along, wonderful. All right, we just modeled a conversation where we navigated through the different levels of the Vantage Point model. And I want to spend a couple of minutes just to debrief, you know, what did you notice? What did you see? From what we've done, any observations?
I mean, once you start to listen to those different levels, you almost cannot not listen. That's what I found from the conversation. I was like, oh, she's in philosophy. Jenny?
Yeah, I felt you were like jumping when it was too high up and too cultural or philosophical. Then you right afterwards went down to on a like more task level, and then you go up again, and it's just like a balance.
Yeah, it's also, I keep the model in the back of my head sometimes, and if I see we're going off track too much, well, actually, it's my own interpretation. Maybe I want to keep it at the philosophy level. Maybe that's exactly what we wanted to do. But this time I also wanted to dive deeper into the lower levels and tasks. And sort of, that's why I also finished asking, you know, what is it that we can concretely do? So sometimes in a conversation with a large group, if you want to move them to action, you definitely want to make sure that you want to leave the philosophy layer and get to the logistics and task stuff, because that's really what they wanted to do, and maybe build forward. Other comments or thoughts? Claudia, yes.
I found this now like, so this conversation, like I could really follow where, like if there was an invisible map, I could absolutely follow where you're going. And what I really like about now having the Vantage model point is to really even map it out and have it visually even more as a steering tool. Where do I want the conversation? Because I find many times it's so tactic, but rather than getting to the culture and the philosophy, this is so important, because only doing the tactics is not enough. And so now with this and hearing how you have been doing this so nicely, beautiful. And then it's really a great, as you're saying it, you keep it in the back of your mind. And this is really a beautiful model to visualize. Very helpful. I find it very helpful. So thank you.
Of course. Amanda, and I also saw Kathleen, you unmuted, so I want to make sure we get back to you as well if you want to. Amanda, please.
Svenja, when you first started using this model, I mean, it was easier for me just listening and watching and paying attention to figure out where you are on the map. But I was also imagining what's going on in your mind and how you are moving this group around through the different levels. How did you first start? Like when you were just getting familiar with the model, what kind of tricks did you use to help you navigate the team through the levels?
What I often do is I'll try to rephrase what I heard. And maybe that's a facilitation technique that's regardless of what type of model you're using, but I often come in saying, well, what I've heard you say is ABC. And then you just see what the reaction is. But it's also another way to bring back the group, to focus them again. And sometimes by me doing this, what I heard you say, I also restate in my mind, okay, I heard them talk about philosophy. So I try to rephrase what I've heard with a philosophy angle. And then I decide, where do I want to go now? Do we stay at philosophy? Then I ask the question around this. I go deeper in philosophy, or I also bring them down to the task stuff. What is it that we need to get done now? So I help to rephrase things. I listened to other facilitators as they were navigating through, and sometimes they had a conversation without using the model at all, but I just applied it because it just helped me to understand where they were at.
I think when I first started, I especially used it kind of as a alignment tool for the group. And I could see that the group was maybe not aligned on philosophy. And so that we needed to do an assignment, or we needed to have people work to get out their visions and stay there. So I use it very much at first as a diagnostic tool, but I have to say that for me now, I use it as primarily two. One, listening as a facilitator. And there's no question that you can clue into the group and who's where if you're listening. And you can do that already start now, like we just did, as Svenja just illustrated. And I think the other thing is that I have made a promise. My commitment is that I'm going to bring in the planet into every engagement I have. It's relevant. And so I want to get to the philosophical level of the group with planet very quickly. And so if there's a lot of heat there, I can continue to add the planet. If the planet is ignored, I can put it into tasks, into an assignment. Not that they know, but I can say, how are we going to account for our carbon footprint in this area or something? So you can really use it quite concretely. And really, I've started to use it very concretely with listening and for assignments.
Jason, you have your hand up, and not sure if Kathleen, your question is still relevant, but I also want to make sure there's space for you. No, cool. Okay, good. Jason.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, do you think there's value in what we're talking about at the moment? A lot of the questioning and answering, a lot of the cognitive load around where the conversation ought to go or should go is sitting on the facilitator side. Like, I'm listening and then I'm hearing that we might need to bump up to culture. And maybe that's the role that we've been given in a scenario, is to hold course and navigate in a particular way. I wonder, is there any value? Does anyone have any experience of when making a model like this explicit to a group that you're working with, it offers a shared navigational tool for the group to say, oh, hang on, you know what, we've spent an awful lot of time planning what our next steps are going to be, and we haven't really clarified whether or not that sits, like we've got a policy that enables that, for instance, or is this in line with our values? And rather than putting the load on the facilitator to kind of make the I just wonder whether or not it's bringing it out of the back pocket and making the landscape explicit to the folks who you sharing the conversation with can enable them to help moderate themselves, especially with mature groups of leaders who just may be in the tasks, logistics and tactics because that's their operational every day, right? And they just need a reminder that, our company still value something, or we still believe in a whole bunch of stuff. Sorry, that was a long-winded question.
No,
but
it's super. I often, if I introduce the model, I do it in the scan phase early on. And sort of, because then that helps also the group to create a shared language. And sometimes, as you said, they pick it up themselves. If they are somewhere down in the focus phase or even later, someone might say, oh, wait a minute, remember at the beginning, we talked about this vantage point model. I think, dear colleague, you talk task, but I'm actually at philosophy. So they bring it back themselves sometimes. If I were to really go into a synthesis conversation where we shift from the focus to act, I would not introduce the model beforehand, because that would really drive participants away from the conversation they need to have. And at the same time, I would also, in fact, let the group have the conversation. I would totally draw myself out of it and I would let them run it, but have a model in the back of my mind so that I know when I need to step in again. If that answers your question. Okay, cool. Amanda, do you have your hand up from previously, or is that still a question that was from previously?
Sorry,
okay.
I need to put my hand down.
Don't worry about it. All right, was one question from Nicole in the chat. What do you do as facilitator if you lose your acute listening and get distracted? I breathe, probably. I don't know.
I sometimes just own it. I'm like, wait a minute, I've just lost, I'm a little bit lost here. Can you help me? Remember that the participants are on your side, or whomever your sponsors, they want you to succeed. Ask them for help. Tell them, wait, can somebody just kind of tell me where we're at? And then you can also hear, if you say that question, if one person says one thing and another person contradicts it, you can see where they're at, and you can have a moment to listen in and find your space again. Do not be afraid to ask the participants help at any moment and to show your vulnerability. You're not there as a superhuman. You're there to help them get what they need done. Does that help? Anyone else have strategies for when you get lost? Zion, is that?
Not a strategy, unfortunately, but only a further question. What happens if it emerges that there's a lot of misalignment within a group or a team, and there are a lot of fractures? How do you convey that back tactfully or diplomatically to the group? Do you let them figure it out themselves, sort of, or do you guide them along to getting them to see the cleavages, sort of?
I would stay in and say, okay, let's stop for a moment. Okay, hold on. We'll just stop right now. And I would say, well, what I'm sensing is that there's misalignment on ABC. And I would say, well, what is it that we need to address? And maybe I also distilled already like 2 or 3 key things that I think we need to address. And then I have a conversation around this in the moment, because if we don't solve this stuff, we won't be able to move on. So I would make it explicit and jump right in.
Yeah, I would probably slow it down at that moment. I would be like, okay, let's just stop a second, because I'm hearing a lot of different voices. Let's take a minute, right? Where are we at? Where do you feel there's alignment and misalignment? And have people do maybe individually. And then perhaps turn to somebody next to them, share what you had and how are we doing? And where are the pieces? And then, from there, you could have them go to a foursome. So you can really slow it down. You can have them play with it. If you've got a bunch of foursomes and have them then call it out, you have groups of people that have had a chance to assemble that information and see where they're at. And then you can say, okay, so I see that we're missing this, this, and this. You can on the spot have them go into a breakout and come up with a solution. Again, this is when emergence is difficult and useful. So you can, as a facilitator, if you remember from last week, you have the power to attenuate and pay attention to things, or to tamp it down, or to bypass it altogether. So you have power to kind of steer the group by what you focus on as well, and also playing with the energy. Does that help a little?
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyone
Thanks.
else?
Great. I think it's time for a break, unless there's another question. Let it percolate. We can come back to some of the questions as well after the break. All right, when do we want to come back again, Jody?
We've got 10 minutes, so please be back at like 32 after the hour.
Yes, And if
We'll
you want
see
to
you
set
soon.
your timer, that's always helpful. Just set it to 10 minutes. All right, welcome back. Do we need a stretch or something quickly? Shall we all just stand up for a moment and just stretch? And I realize I still wear this hat. Just make sure you get up from your chair and you just stretch left and right, and then go all the way up on your toes and reach the ceiling. Come on, you can do it. Reach the ceiling, and now go all the way down and tickle your toes. I think you can do that too. All right, touch your toes, no cheating. And then do a little shake. Shake your arms. Yeah, exactly. Shake them up. Shake them as fast as you can, because that really brings in energy. As fast as you can. All right. Good. Perfect. You can also jump up and down a little bit. Okay, I forgot to play music, but I think you just make this up. Super. Thank you for this. Now what's next, Jody? What are we doing next?
We would like to have you spend some time with the Vantage Point model, but really to start to apply it to today's topic, which was sharing an afterlife and kind of closing an engagement. Because as we know from movies and songs, the most important part of any kind of activity is the close. And so we want you to spend some time on it. And specifically, we want you to apply the Vantage Point model to how would you use it at the end of an engagement? How would you use it with a group at the end of an engagement to kind of synthesize and summarize? And then how might you use it with your sponsors at the end to kind of close the one part and start orienting them to the next touch point of the big systemic challenge or opportunity? Does that make sense to people? Do I need to? So we want you to really think about this model again as both a diagnostic and as a process model, and to think and to share with each other how you might be able to use it at the end as a synthesis, as a place to land.
Great. We give you 15 minutes for that conversation. You'll be in groups with 3 or 4 people.
Click on the link,
Jody
please. Yeah.
also posted the link. And as you get into the group, you see which number you are, and then you can travel to your respective slide. Any questions on the process? All right. Okay, we'll be for 15 minutes in breakouts. Have fun.
I can't hear it, the music. Maybe you want to make it a little louder. Oh, okay, okay. Welcome back. We would love to hear what you all came up with. Can I ask somebody from Sarah, Jason, Kaylee, Tanya's team to maybe just talk us through very quickly, a minute or so?
Okay, team, I did a bunch of the scribing. So took down, we were saying, like in terms of the Vantage Point model at the end of an engagement, it's an interesting tool to potentially raise the coherence of a solution. Like, how does this hang together from, do we have all the necessary components in place? It can be used as a map to guide the nature of the work going forward, and therefore the roles and responsibilities or the teams and the ownership of that sort of work going forward. And the piece that we got to at the end, which was really interesting, was around, how do we use it as a orientation tool for ongoing action of the coalition organization group, as some sort of evaluation tool, even like, what level of challenges are we facing within, the group going forward, and what other action might we need to take? Sorry, team, you might have to help me with an example. I mean, the example we used is, for instance, we might be engendering we might be asking for a particular type of action at the front line, but we don't, and we have a philosophy that supports that, and our values do, but we don't have a policy in place that kind of nudges it. But there's a whole bunch of calibration that has to get done there around, how much do you manage? Second piece around how might we use it with sponsors to synthesize the end state and get ready to move to the next issue/opportunity was really interesting. The idea that came up as a way to draw attention to the work that's been done so far and use it as a potential guide going forward. So, do you realize we talked about all, we covered the topography of things, and a coherent solution is one that has all manner of that working together. So, it might be worth thinking about going forward. Here's a type of map that you can use to orient to that.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's hear from group 2. Helen, Louise, Monique. And if you have things that are repetitive to the last group, you can just say, yeah, we agreed, or you can build on what they did. Let's hear from you all.
Shall I go? So I guess we had some similar ideas about, evaluating whether you have some blind spots or things you didn't touch upon, and to check whether there may still be some conflicts or things like unclear, and to see also if you are aware of what other people, other roles are doing and thinking, to also to share that common language. We thought it's really also a nice reference to keep. So if you have it really visualized on a wall, it sort of can be kept as a reference, and that also leads to the second question. Like, okay, you can see what things are still like needing some action or some attention, and also maybe thinking of follow-up projects or assignments or engagements. So we thought, maybe similar to the first group, but good way to summarize and to get your new focus.
Thank you. We are going to talk a little bit after this, when you said keep it up on the wall, about work products and how to keep this in front of the sponsors and how you might use the Vantage Point in a work product. Let's hear from, did I miss team 3? Jenny, Kathleen, Claudia.
I can give it a try. So we talked about that companies, especially in the point of sustainability, like to just quickly kick off different initiatives and just do bits and pieces everywhere to maybe check some boxes. And this Vantage Point model can really help to bridge the gaps between different initiatives on different levels, and then allows a holistic view on the entire problem, and maybe like surface what is missing. And then it's a little different topic, but I've been thinking about the commitment ceremonies at the end of a session that we like to do. And I just realized they're usually pretty open, and some people are focusing more on a like task-based level, that like actions that they want to do in their daily life from now on that we like them to commit to. But sometimes it is also on a very high level in like terms of culture and philosophy and their thinking and their mindset that they from now on try to bring forward. So maybe you can leverage the model in this form as well somehow. It was more like a question. And similar to the others, we also figured that the session has been maybe focused on one end of the model, either the upper one or the lower, and then it can help to guide them to the other end of the model.
Just as a thought, I think it's a great idea, Jenny. You know, sometimes at the end of sessions we do or ask for people for commitments, either, you know, it's part of the flow. It's nice to also, you know, acknowledge that sometimes a commitment could be totally at the task level, but equally relevant also at the philosophy level. Maybe someone just says, I'm just so willing to always stand up for our vision no matter what. Maybe that's okay. So I think it's nice to also see it in this context. Thank you for that.
Team 4, Nicole, Sudarshan, Amanda.
I thought we were a different slide, so I just want to say I was really confused because we were talking and somebody was scribing on a different slide. I'm like, why does that not reflect what we're talking about? I was so confused. So sorry about the blanks.
That's so okay if you didn't write anything down. That means you had a great conversation, which is
we
perfect.
had a great conversation. We really did.
Perfect.
And it was very much like the other things that people mentioned. I will mention that we talked a lot about how it can help show how the team moved from like this plethora and chaos of ideas into some formal structure, which would make them feel good, would make some people just be like, oh, that feels great. Finally, some like, I didn't think we were going to get there, but look where we got. We also talked about it as a physical exercise, sort of getting people to go up and move things around, you know, with the post-it notes, get them up, move them around, get them feeling energized before the close. We also talked about possibly using it as a product, like a guide for a product, because we were thinking about what comes after the meeting and could we use this model as a structure for the final report or the report out. Does anybody want to add anything to that on my team? And we learned how Sudarshan and Svenja met on a bus.
Nice. So I think that what we're kind of turning towards now and slowly pivoting from is the multiple use of this vantage point model.
Jody, we have one more team. We have one more team, not to forget.
Oh,
one more team, team 5.
Oh,
yes.
So sorry. I'm not on it. How did I miss? There we go. Team 5. Zion, Aunt Mel, and Stephanie. Sorry about that. Please go.
Zion was the most vocal and best articulate person who has used it in that type of engagement. So Zion, not putting you on the spot, but
sure. And since we everyone had discussed the definition, we focused a little bit more on how we might be implementing it. And we're talking about how we might either take one of two approaches, make the model very explicit at the beginning and scribe capturing it, or to make it non-explicit and explain at the end to participants so they don't get bogged down in details. To potentially, if we're using online tools like Miro or Mural, to color code commonalities and outliers so they themselves are seeing where differences are occurring. Mm-hmm. And basically, it could be used to test action planning and next steps. It could run it. Basically, how do you do it diplomatically? How do you get themselves to see where there's work to be done? And for synthesizing, it depends on the room, how they think, operate, and align. And it's very key to be zooming in and zooming out to draw the relationships and make the connections more explicit, especially between, let's say, a philosophical level and an operational or task level. And getting them to understand the human side of the issues and not only build appreciation for the complexity and constraints, but also develop empathy for various perspectives and point of views. because sometimes if it emerges that one team is on X side and another team is on Y, to make sure that they're not butting heads over it, but can recognize the positives of each solution, even if one of them is the right fit for the company.
Thank you. A very versatile model, as you can see, and we really hope that you will play with it, employ it in all these different ways with your sponsors in the back of your mind as an actual assignment tool for listening and for your facilitation. It's really one of our favorites, and we're super happy to introduce it to you today. And I think it's relevant, especially towards the end of engagements, because for you, and I think someone had mentioned it, if there's multiple organizations involved and they're at different places, at the end of an engagement, you can also use the Vantage Points to help them move to the next step. And that's really what we want to pivot to right now, is either at the end of a part of your complex engagement or opportunity, or actually at the end of a session, you need to close it, and you don't want this to be the end of your relationship. You want to keep working on parts of this issue. You want to keep pushing it ahead, and you want to make it relevant both for your sponsors and for the world. And we just want to have a little talk about that right now. How you might do that at the end of an engagement. We'd love to hear from you. Many of you are already working on some complex engagements. You're in the middle of it, you finish pieces. Talk to us a little bit about how you as a system leader maintain momentum.
One thing that I'm thinking about is in the phase of work that I'm in with the sponsor design team, I'm also thinking about their next strategic priority and how what we're doing right now fits within that, so that if that doesn't naturally emerge, it can be prompted, or at minimum show the leadership team that you're really thinking about their set of future strategic priorities.
Someone else build on that?
Yeah, for me, oh, sorry. Okay, as I work internally, I'm sort of also involved, or I can monitor from within whether things that we thought of are being implemented, and I'm coordinating, monitoring, and evaluation. So for me, it's also always a next step to then make it concrete and define like sort of the indicators that you will track. So yeah, maybe that's some way that I continue. Okay, so how are we going to monitor the progress and actually get insights of how it's improving or not? So I'm measuring actually, yeah.
So we have different tools. One is definitely the experience summary, which is a different focus every time. So we always ask what this output document should be like, or what it should focus. For example, if it's more on content and the end results, or if it needs to be a communication deck that participants or the sponsors then can lead forward. So it's more like an experience summary, what have we done, and like a very summarized version of the results. And we always schedule a follow-up call for like already at the beginning of the sponsor process for like 2 to 3 weeks, or maybe even a month after the session, so that this is already in the calendar to see how the project is going, how it's running, and how it really helped them. And yeah, as I was saying, right after that's also kind of a momentum, this commitment ceremony, which is really a ceremony with music and maybe sometimes some gadgets or things that I need to write on paper. We also did when there were in-person sessions, we have them write postcards or fill out postcards, and we sent them the postcards 1 month later to see, like, to their homes to see what they have achieved. Yeah, that's what
I think that's super relevant about checking in after some time has passed, because of course at the end of the session everybody's in it, they're away from the office, they're all together. You go back to the office and then the structure of the office and all those priorities come back in the politics. So I think there's a really important piece about staying in touch afterwards. I'm sorry, I cut someone off. Kaylee?
Yeah, I also work internally. I think it was Monique who said that. And we just went through a strategy refresh about a year ago. And then they delegated, I really liked the strategy of delegating an internal facilitator, which would be my part. And so I continue the process beyond the actual facilitation, which has been really helpful. So it's like an internal handover.
Being intentional about that handover. Ellen and Jason.
I was just thinking, in my situation, sometimes it's tricky because I work mostly with nonprofits, or the funding comes from a foundation of some sort. So there's two elements. One is trying to figure out how to make sure that they have the resources to do the next phase of work, because often somebody has funded a plan, but they haven't funded implementation. And so that can be really tricky. And then for me, in designing what they have to do next, and one of my values that I hold in my consulting work is that I try to make it, in some ways, I'm trying to work myself out of a job. There are some consultants in community development who are out there always trying to find the next piece of work for themselves, and it gets really icky. And so trying to figure out a way that I balance what they need to independently do this for themselves, but also where I can genuinely step in to help them if it's going to fall apart without some outside assistance.
Super, thank you. That's so important. Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Ellen. I mean, I'll follow on from that. I think if I were going to generalize what's become more important going forward, certainly from if I look historically at, initially doing this sort of work to more recently, the two sort of components would be like in as final pieces of work, or as like in MG Taylor language, post buckets, like having someone doing having a group specifically focused on cadence and ongoing ways of working, and hopefully if folks have in whatever form that needs to take, and if there's been an emergence of people who genuinely own the solution in the session, then you've already identified the kind of folks with the passion to do it. And so equipping them, like giving them the time to then coordinate how it is that they need to drive it forward, I think is a really important component to seeing stuff continue to run.
Do you also know of examples where the momentum completely dropped? Where it's almost like, well, we missed the ball. And this is not a question for you, Jason, but for everybody, because there maybe also are other examples where I wish we could have done X, Y, Z, but we totally didn't. Feel free to answer, Jason.
I was just going to say, well, I mean, it's almost the classic criticism that often large group facilitation gets, is that, people come away and do the rah-rah and come out with a strong vision, have all drunk the Kool-Aid, and but no one's thought about, I mean, to Ellen's point, what it takes to actually operationalize that, what the resourcing is that's required to do it, what the operational steps that people need to galvanize around in order to start the work and get it done, and then importantly keep it going, measure against it, learn and reflect on it, all that kind of stuff. But but I'm like, I don't have a specific example where it's fallen over and that we've come back in and picked it up. I'm sorry.
That's okay, but I just want to highlight the importance, often when we start the whole sponsor process, we don't design until the end of the session, but I think it's so important to design way beyond that. And that's sort of where the sharing part of the Ricoh Cube comes in again. And it's the sharing of the results, but it's also the whole sort of initiation of keeping up the momentum. So it's really important to make this part of your entire journey at the beginning already.
Yeah, I had the question, when do you bring it in the sponsor process, or like at one point? I mean, most at the beginning you try to find the objectives or the purpose for the session, and when I now try to think about the process, I find it hard to think when would be the right time to speak about how is it going to continue.
I would do it right at the start already, because when you talk about the objectives, I think they are long-term aspirations that go well beyond the session anyway. So I think I would also for sure make sure that this is part of all of it. And here we have Dan who's raising his hand already.
No, just to your specific question, because this comes up a lot. Am I allowed to jump in?
Sure.
Of course you are. Go ahead.
because
but we haven't introduced you yet. But
I'd love to introduce you first, but I'll do it after.
Okay. So, yeah, I know that what Jenny just said, we take that really seriously, and that in the very first sponsor session, before we sold the work, we always get into what happens afterwards. And we typically, both as a sales tool, but more as a scoping tool, we will do a take a panel sort of exercise with the sponsor team, often before we have written a proposal. And which is, I think, have you talked about that tool, Svenja and Jody, take a panel? So it's a backcasting exercise, yeah. And we will always build in 1 or 2 questions about the weeks and months following this event. And if they are misaligned, I don't really care what they say. What's important is how aligned are they about what they say. And if they're all over the place, it means they haven't really thought it through, and they're putting too much importance on the event itself. And that's a big red flag. If they haven't already talked about what comes next, then they're in trouble.
Thank you, Dan. And I think that's a great moment. Amanda, do you want to say one thing? No, let me just.
You are on mute. One of the things that I thought was really helpful from a client perspective was leaving when I was a client, the Value Web left products with me as part of the sponsor team and as part of the implementation team. It was really nice to have graphical designs, drawings, maps, mental maps, like having those products were brilliant, because then as somebody who was going to implement that later, I had all those tools and I could keep introducing them. So I just can't emphasize enough, Jody, how important that step is, that you leave some really useful tools behind with your clients.
Yeah, we will get into that a little bit after Dan's, and maybe Dan, you want to even speak a little bit. All right, we are going to take a 10-minute break. We will see you back here at 5 after the hour. Please set your timer and see you soon.
Recording once more. So we have 3 terms that we're going to explore a bit more, which is synthesis, creative problem solving, and neutrality, sort of crowdsourced through a word cloud in Slido. Let's start with synthesis. For me, I think synthesis somehow comes together as we are shifting from focus into act. And I use synthesis actually in a synthesis conversation. That is sort of the structure that I apply when we go along scan, focus, act. But I also want to note that it doesn't always have to be in a linear order, scan, focus, act. It could also be focus, act, scan, or whatever it is. But let's just assume right now it is scan, focus, and act. And during the phases of scan and focus, we are quite rigid on what we do with participants in terms of how we actually facilitate them. We give them assignments, and often on purpose, they will never finish. So we don't give them enough time to also build the arc of almost, tension, but a creative tension that almost all comes to land during the synthesis conversation, because that's the turning point when you're shifting from focus into act. And that is a conversation that almost brings out all the things that have been discussed before. So ideally, you should touch on everything that's relevant way before as well, so that you are well equipped to go into this conversation.
Can I just talk a little bit about the structure of it for people that may not be familiar with it?
Go ahead.
We often, well, for synthesis, we put people in a circle so they can see each other. Because this is the moment of truth. This is, if you remember those two crosses where we have a lot of control at the beginning and the participants have none, this is the moment that we hand the control to the participants. We want them to look at each other. So that's the mechanics. And maybe you want to talk a little bit about the question that you pose at that moment and then how you come out of it.
Absolutely. So thank you, Jody. So as Jody said, in light of everything speaks, it's really important how the space is set. So again, it's also a side of a different shift in energy. I'm talking about this as if it were an in-person situation. And as Dan has said, it's not easy to do such a synthesis in virtual, but I've done it and it works as well, but differently. So let's just assume it's an in-person situation and people are sitting in chairs, and often it's sort of concentric circles of chairs because you might have multiple people and they don't all fit into one circle. But I often start the conversation by reflecting the journey that we've taken up until this point. So just to revisit the things that we've done. And then I just simply ask them, so we have all the time in the world until the end of today. What do you think is left for us to do? As we are together and it's a great moment and we have all this brain power in the room, what is left to do? And then I stay quiet. I stay quiet for quite a while. Like now. And then things pop up. What's also important, we still work with the sponsor team the day before at night. So basically the sponsor team always gets bonus time with us. So when participants are finished, we always have a sponsor meeting to review the day. And at the end of the focus day, we get together with the sponsor group, and there might be quite some frustration because they also sense it. Well, we're not done. What's going on? We have so much stuff to do. What's happening? And we also acknowledge that, but we also tell the sponsor group, well, that's quite normal. And you see things falling into place tomorrow. And there's one ask that we have to you, dear sponsor team. If there's silence in the space, just don't jump in right away, because it's also important to keep that silence and have others step up and actually start to own it. And that's also the moment where sometimes those speak up that they've not spoken up until this point. And so that's sort of the briefing we give to the sponsor team the night before. And then I'll let the conversation run, and I keep the vantage point model in the back of my head, but I also often use another model that we haven't talked about here, but you can also find the details on this on the learning platform. It's the creative process model that I also use for these type of conversations, where I understand how the group is shifting and how they're moving from basically the intent to really doing the things they wanted to do. And so it's really helpful to have any of these models in the back of your mind when this conversation takes place, to also then understand, when do I need to intervene? And I do need to intervene when I also feel that they're drifting away, or I also need to intervene when I feel they get too quickly to tasks. And maybe there are certain things that they still need to talk about, such as, is it really clear why we are all together here? What really is our identity and our vision? Where are we going? And so they do need to circle on this, but then there's a moment when they do get down to tasks. And then that's the point where I let the topics emerge and we write them on the wall. And then we cluster them a little bit with the group. And then the idea is that then participants vote with their feet and on a topic that they have most passion for. And that's also then how we create the ownership within the group. And then these become the topics for the rest of the day. And then they probably spend almost like 5 hours in one working group to really get to the nitty-gritty details. And then there are other things we do in between. As everything is connected, we have, you know, they might do a scouting round where they visit each other's work. There might be an integration team or things like that. So the synthesis, in a way, is a key point where we shift the ownership over to the group. And often we don't know how long that takes. I've seen people crying, I've had lots of emotions, but it's a really important moment to bring all these parts together. Jody, what did I miss?
I see that Monique has a question, and so maybe I'll chime in after that.
Oh, is it Mouse? Oh, here we go. Monique, did you have your hand up, or is that from earlier?
Yeah, but it was more about the second, the creative problem solving. So I'll
Okay.
put my hand down. Sorry.
Okay.
I want to talk. I mean, I think that is right for synthesis, and as Dan said, it's a really hard thing to do on if it's virtual or hybrid. And I just want to raise that because synthesis is time where, as Svenja said, people speak up and they feel like it's their last moment to vomit their truth into the circle. And so they can get very emotional and they can get really testy. And as a facilitator, this is when you can either, you know, say nothing, which I often do. You can amplify something or attenuate something. And it's also a time when I turn to the sponsors and I say to the sponsor, what do you have to say about it? And I let them answer it. So just to know that this moment, because people are so invested in the outcome, can be super tense and fraught with emotion. And if you let it play out until people are kind of over it, you start to hear some patterns. And when you start hearing things repeat, is kind of the moment that we take control, that I feel like, okay, I'm going to come in and I'm going to help synthesize this for you. Here's what I'm hearing. And that's what Svenja was saying, where she would maybe, here's what I'm hearing. This is something we need to do. Here's this another thing. And when those are on the wall, you ask the group, especially the sponsors, are these right? What are we missing? Once you land on those topics, the vote with your feet means that we've given up control. We're not making teams anymore. We say to people, you better run with the pen and grab a pen and sign up, or also online, quickly join your breakout group on the thing you want to work with. And people run and sign up. And then we sit back down, we see how, if we have enough people, if there's a topic and no one signed up, okay, not important. Should we get rid of it? If there's a topic that a lot of people wanted to sign up and you've allowed it that way, you may want to tease it apart and put it into some constituent parts, kind of parallel process on that piece. Give one group a piece of what does that mean for next week? And then maybe another group about what does this mean for 6 months from now? So you can tear it apart.
I saw that Ellen has her hand up. I also acknowledge that there's a question from Mel earlier. Just a quick one. How do you find the dynamics of this virtually? It's harder to have the diversity of voices naturally. That's absolutely true. It's really not easy to do this virtually. Because just as us, imagine we are a group, we are supposed to have a synthesis conversation. And how do you actually jump in naturally? How do you don't talk over each other? I mean, the technicalities are not so easy to do, but sometimes I might run some separate circles of conversations, such as what we've done earlier, where you others turned your camera off. So I maybe take a group of 5 and have a conversation, and then take another group of 5, and then just see how all of this merges together. But it's really not an easy thing to do. I prefer not to do it virtually. I really prefer to do it in the room, because then you can also read the energy and you can actually really, you know, get to the group of what's needed.
I also think that maybe just before the synthesis conversation, if you had some participant knowledge objects, some outputs, or if you have a graphic person who's captured things, and there's things to remind folks of the journey they have taken, previous events that may be tied, because we're talking about systems. So if you've brought in things from other parts of that journey, this is a moment in terms of synthesis to just pause share some of those documents. You don't even have to say anything about them. Just refresh people's memory. And again, this is a moment where your attenuation or amplification as a facilitator has an important role. What do you bring in for people at this point to reflect on before they begin to speak? And Dan had mentioned some of those 10% of ideas that got lost that you think is important. That would be a good time to bring that piece of information into the circle or onto the screen and just have some music and let people remember the journey. So I think that the synthesis before the act pay moment is important, but I may want to zoom out a little bit more toward strategy. And I think there's a role for synthesis at many different points of your time in front of the room. Before you're going to pivot to something new, you might want a synthesis thing. When there's conflicting ideas, you may want to put some kind of a framework, a 2x2, even just titles with things on the board and say, so I feel, is this where we're at? Again, in asking the group to help self-synthesize what's important to them. So there's a lot of places for synthesis, especially to just pause and help people have a framework or make sense of something before they move on.
That's great. Ellen, do you want to come in with a question? I see you have your hand up.
Yeah. Svenja, when you were talking about getting the group back together and sort of letting them organically say what's sitting with them that they feel like still needs to happen, how do you balance that with knowing how you would design them to go through the process of figuring out what the tasks are and what the responsibilities are? Like, are you letting them say, well, we need to get to tasks, and if they don't say that, then you don't do it? Like, to what extent are you handing them the steering wheel?
That is a great point. Actually, the synthesis only works if you have a proper scan and focus beforehand. I've just done a session actually past weekend where we were brought in halfway through the design process, and there were we had basically been giving a list of 20 speakers that needed a slot. And so that's not the way how we work. We don't go through panel conversations. However, we had to sort of design something halfway through. So it wasn't the proper scan, it wasn't the proper focus because we were could use half of the day to do some of the work that we do. But we still went into the synthesis conversation, but it didn't work the way it should have usually worked because they didn't have enough time to actually draft various different ideas. We only could do one round of a first draft of what the project ideas should be for the future. So the synthesis actually didn't get through, it didn't combine all the layers of the vantage point model because in fact, you do need to travel through them to also land at the task level. But I mean, we still managed to drive out the key topics, but I think it could have been a lot richer if we had a proper scan and focus process up front.
So what I do is, this is not the moment for me to tell them anything. I say, define your work. You've got 20 minutes, all of you. Define your work. What are you going to do for the rest of the day? What's your outputs? And then after each of those teams define their output, the sponsors and I walk around and guide them. Yeah, no, that's not quite what we mean. We mean this. You do this. To be sure to talk to team 3. So some integration. So we really force them to own the entire output of what they're doing. And we say, if we say that's 10,000 feet, that's not good enough. We need you to know who, what, where, when. Do it again. We'll be back in 15 minutes, or start working. Or so we really make them define their work product, Ellen, at that point.
Jody, I think I'm talking about the step before that. So I get the step where they voted with their feet and they're in their little work groups. But before that, when Svenja said that she has them reflect on what's still to be done, is, you know, what if what's still to be done in their mind is not the little work groups? I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out, where you balance the control versus design.
Absolutely. I mean, if the process up front sort of has been designed with all the intention, then these topics should just come up. I don't think there's any type of new topic that pops up in the synthesis that hasn't been discussed before. So, because if it were, then we might not have spent enough time on sort of a first draft. That is needless to say that there are new topics that emerge for sure, but they're not outside of the entire scope of what we're doing.
And again, the group self-corrects. The group is the one who self-corrects on that. So sorry, Jason, go ahead.
And am I right in thinking, you know, that the group also has the, you know, the macro constraints that they've agreed to going in. So the objectives of what we've agreed we're going to come out with, the scope of the work that we're doing, and the givens, like the hard constraints that are in there. And, you know, there's always the opportunity for the group to be going, oh, well, you know, does this work that we've put up here to do this afternoon, does that get us to the objectives that we're trying to achieve? You know, and that's another sort of calibration point, because, you know, we've already come in to the session with the good intent to hit these objectives. What is it that we need to get there? You know, because they're not things that we're renegotiating necessarily. Does that sound okay to you?
I mean, yeah, I think you're exactly right. And Ellen, if the group wants to do something different, then it's the sponsor's role to bring them back into focus. And I will say to the sponsor, you know, does this make sense at this point? Or is that something we're going to have to address another time? It's not up to, again, at that point, it's not up to us to decide. It's really a sponsorship issue. And in my experience, that's never happened. I don't know if any of you else have ever had something that's gone totally in another direction at that point. Not at that point. Certainly at other points, I've had rebellions and switched completely, but not at that level, not by the time we're down that track.
And Amanda's point also, it's absolutely true. The groups are different levels, 100%. I mean, it's actually, it's also good that they're not all on task, because you need the variety as well. You also need the groups on the different layers of the Vantage Point model to finalize the work. Jason.
If I could make the observation, sorry, I just want to jump in. If I can make the observation as well, there's sort of, and whether or not this is sort of coming from a predominantly corporate context, but I think it's fair to say that, you know, in the events where you're really driving to, like, trying to engender action out of it, there is something to be said for, you know, if we see ourselves as facilitators, as container builders, so providing context for people to do the work that they need, although we're letting the participants say the work that needs to get done because we've generated the ownership, etc. We've provided the macro constraints going into it with the scope, objectives, and givens, you know, and carefully designed a process that folks have gone through. There is still a role in really good knowledge work, is there not, like, or in facilitation work in general, in helping provide the container to catch that sort of work. So if a team, for instance, might be, you know, immature is the wrong word, but may lack a set of skills around sequencing priorities or organizational sequencing, then sure, there's it's a responsibility, if we have the tools available, to give them a template that helps them sequence up the work, like provide the 2x2, or, you know, that gives them a horizon map or something similar. And again, that's not directing the work or applying intent, it's providing a container in which to catch the work and structure the work and enable people to work more effectively coming out of it. And there are a swath of, you know, tools available, you know, to kind of help folks do that, you know, groups do that.
Louise, you also have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with what you were saying before, Svenja, around participants come at very different level from the Vantage Point model. Would you purposely in breakout groups put them together depending on which area of the Vantage Point model they come from, or would you intentionally mix very different vantage points.
So the work that happens after the synthesis discussion is actually organized by the groups themselves. So they decide where they want to work on. So I wouldn't put them in any group. So they take ownership and basically literally sign their name underneath a topic title on a wall. But if we do this vantage point exercise that Jody has introduced at the start of our conversation today, in the scan phase, I would have one group potentially on task, another group on logistics, another on tactics. So you can split them up this way, but this is a module for scan rather. But everything that happens after the synthesis is more with participants to basically, get together and then own the work and decide for themselves what they want to do. And if this means vote with your feet, you basically physically go into the breakout, that way you have most passion for.
And I think your role as facilitator at this point is key, because you and the sponsor are glued together at this point, going from group to group. You're listening for a few minutes. You're talking to the sponsor. You're at that point, if you feel, hey, wait, you are way too philosophical. You need to get to the logistics point of this or task. That's when you inject that piece, or two levels, like frame the vision and then tell us how you're going to do it. So this is the moment that you can, and it's really the sponsor and you kind of being the coach to the sponsor at that point to make sure, and it's important to you and to the whole engagement and probably the whole systemic movement, that you get it right at this point, that the work that's being done and the questions that those groups are answering. It's a really critical moment for you and your sponsor to get extremely clear together and aligned.
Shall we move to creative problem solving?
I'm happy to just start with that. I think you mean like, how do we make it playful so that people stay engaged? And if that is not what you mean, please put it in the text. I think that, I'm a big fan of making it playful and impactful. So you've already seen with some of the icebreakers we've done that you can make it fun and meaningful. And I think that's the Venn diagram you're looking for, is how can it be fun? So it's hard to, there's a book called Game Storming, and I think I put it on the reading list, but it has a list of almost every module and game you can think of. You are not on your own on this. If you also Google games for groups, you can find a million things. So let me tell you a few things that I've done, and tell me if I'm on the right path, okay? And if not, I'm totally able to pivot. Especially in SCAN, it's very easy to be playful. So I had a group that was not gelled. They didn't gel before, and they needed to. They needed to become a team before they could manage the giant issue ahead. And so I had them do without talking, I took a giant rope and and it was all jumbled, and they had to put it into some funky shapes. They had to make a house, or they had to make a isosceles triangle, or they had to untangle it, or they had to tangle it. So you can do, the human knot and tangle. There's games to play that take very short time that can be intentional to what you're trying to do. I often do these pieces without talking, because I find that the people who talk are always primary and always heard. And so I try to do things that require some different intelligences. And again, that's something that you as a facilitator can play with. A few other important things you can do. You can use some art. You can do the masterpiece, which everybody gets a little tiny piece of a giant known famous artwork. and have them paint it and then have to come and assemble it. This is a dude that I had some of our graphic people work on, and they it was used for walking in the shoes of, or being a little bit more sensitive. So if this is your person, outfit him for 2050 and AI. So you can use graphics to help you be creative, and to help your folks get creative. Take them out of their comfort zone, and don't be afraid to make them do it. I have surgeons at a major medical university medical center. He's like, I don't want any of that stuff. But what they want to know is what are the areas of surgery that are going to be important in the future. So we're going to play a heat map game, and they're each going to get some, medical center bucks, and they're going to first come up with topics and describe why it's important for the future. Then we're going to give each person a few of these medical center bucks, and they're going to vote, and we're going to see where's the heat. That gives you a pattern. It gives them something fun. It's game-like. There's so many. Win as much as you can about how optimizing one part of the system makes it collapse. So again, it depends what you want to do. And I'm just going to say my favorite of all time is three-dimensional modeling. And so you get all kinds of, I think Amanda's done this with me, but I'm not sure. Have you done that, Amanda? Have we done 3D modeling?
Describe it and maybe it'll ring a bell.
Okay, so you give people some weird things. You give them pipe cleaners and feathers and a few Monopoly dollars and some pennies and some paper and some glue and tape. And you say to them, model the future of X using these metaphorical pieces. And it's extremely powerful. First of all, you have to think about it. Then you have to 2D model it. And then you actually have to 3D model it. And often I make them do that without talking. And so, you can just vary these pieces depending on what you need to do. Again, the games in and online, it is a little bit more fun, hard to have fun in terms of these elements. But with Miro, if you've got someone who's pretty talented that can help you create a board, you can do some fun things. But it is a lot harder to have these playful elements online. However, Google Play games online, and there are pieces to find that you might be able to import.
There are fun things you can do online. I did a team building session once, and we wanted to finish the session with an appreciation shower where basically you share, your love with everybody else, and it worked really well. And the question is, in what type of order should we go? And in order to distinguish the order, I asked everybody to send me a photo of their fridge up front. And so I created a fridge bingo. And so basically we asked, whose fridge is this? And then they actually guessed for the person, and that was the person who received the appreciation shower. It was fun because it was personal, and it was so like their stuff was on there because, you don't know what people have in their fridge. Because I asked them, well, take a photo without cleaning it or without actually organizing it. And it's really fun. We had baby bottles and stuff. Anyway, so that's sort of other things you can do online. Of course, it's more limited, but there's also possibilities for games that you can do online.
So I just want to talk about the appreciative inquiry and creative problem solving. Appreciative inquiry is more of an approach to being positive in terms of the issues that you're facing. So you're looking for the best in the world. You're assuming the best, and I think it can be applied to any type of assignment. Appreciative inquiry is not a module, it's a mindset. And the mindset is, how can I frame this such that I'm not focusing on all the negative pieces, but I want to let the positive pieces shine, and the happy pieces, and assume kindness and generosity. So it's more of a mindset as I understand it. And maybe some of you have a different understanding of that, but it's it's worth reading about, and you can apply that. And it is what I use. I really do like not to focus on the problems necessarily, or the old problems, because they may not exist.
I'm conscious of time because we also want to finish on time, but we still have one tiny round of check-in ready for you.
Can I just wait 1 second? And before we go away, and you're going to hear more from her, I would like to introduce Thea Shorey, who's been behind all of those conversations and working diligently, and she's joined us for the end of our program. So welcome, Thea, and we will hear more from you.
Thanks.
Sorry, go ahead, Svenja.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. So, as you all have so wonderfully also shared the conversations with one another about the specific design challenges that you were facing, we wanted to give you a moment to actually go back into the groups that you were in for the design challenge and spend not a lot of time, but basically 5 minutes with one another, just to share whatever you want to share with one another. You could also talk about how do you want to integrate what you've learned, but it's also about, how do you maybe want to thank one another that you spend time with one another in these design challenges. So I've done my best to put you back into the same groups. I know some of you weren't there all the time, but you should recognize each other because you know each other already. So I'll send you into groups for 5 minutes, and you can use that time to wrap up your design challenge as best as you like. All right, see you in 5 minutes on the other side again.
We would love if you could all put on your graduation caps, and we'll take a picture. So you go to video, and you go to choose video filter, and there you'll see a graduation cap, and we'll take a family photo.
Or you can also choose any other hat. I think that's okay too.
True. Oh,
Whatever
yeah,
you find
Sudarshan
is relevant.
got it.
Sudarshan is pretty cool. Choose whatever you feel like. Whenever you're ready, we'll take a little
Jason, awesome.
Excuse me, in video, choose virtual background, or where?
No, choose video filter.
Filters.
Where is?
It's right under choose video background.
I have none.
I have none either.
Oh, you must not
Some
have
of the
latest.
versions of Zoom don't show it.
You might not have the latest version of Zoom, which is a great way to update your Zoom account.
It's a good idea. Let's ready.
Oh,
do you have a hat to grab, Claudia, somewhere? Do you have a real hat?
Yes, I have. I have.
Okay, go grab it. All right, Ants, you're a little dark.
Yeah.
It's not a real
It's nighttime or darkness. All right, ready?
Ready?
One.
And let's do another one where we look really, really funny. Try something funny. Turn upside down or whatever.
Oh,
you
nice
want.
box.
Okay, cheese. Thank you.
We are just really deeply grateful to your engagement and your insights and your attention, and having you spend the time with us on this Systems Leaders Academy. Our first test, but probably not our last. Your feedback has been essential to also making the course fit you. Right now, Svenja is going to put in the chat a survey, a final survey that's a little bit longer. It'll probably take you maybe 10-ish minutes to fill it out. We would highly welcome your unvarnished, deeply important advice on what we should do next and what you need and what the world needs. And so we'd love you to finish it by maybe early next week, Tuesday, if we could, so that it's all fresh. Yeah, it's available to access. Thea's gonna send you that information, and we'll also post it in Mighty Networks. And also know that we will probably contact you in about 6 weeks, just like we would our other sponsors, and see how things are going and what you've used and what was important.
And I want to also present, of course, Adrien, who's not with us today, but he's been with us on the entire journey. And I also want to thank another big thank you to Thea. Without her dedicated energy and all of it, can we just give it up for her, like a little wave or something? So well done, Thea. Thank you for all of it.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
You can stay connected on Mighty Network. There is a place there to message each other if you want to offer your personal either phone number or email. We did not, for privacy's sake, share any of that, but we hope that you will stay connected to us and keep feeding into our system how we could make these types of training programs for the world and for each of you so much better.
And I think one other thing we're also thinking of maybe doing not a quick, but a check-in once more in about 4 to 6 weeks, because it would be nice just to have another touch point with you all and also hear from you how you are integrating all of what you're learning. And maybe there's more input and feedback that you have for us as we are potentially designing version 2 of what we've just experienced. So thank you all. I almost don't want to say goodbye. It's weird.
Thank you.
We'll play a bit of music and you're welcome to stay on with us for a bit of dance out if you like. Jody, any other final words?
Thank you all. We really have, we've enjoyed it and we hope you have too.
Thank you, Svenja.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Svenja. Thank you, Jody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Nice meeting you all.
Give us some volume, Svenja. Put it up.
Crazy people, love you. Bye.
All the best from Australia. Take care.